You are looking at the forgotten way people stored apples so they lasted all the way to spring. No refrigerator, no electricity, no chemical waxes, just a hole in the ground, a bale of straw, and a trick so simple that 9 months later you could bite into fruit that tasted like it just left the tree. But here is the number that changes everything: 95% humidity at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Because the secret was never just the cold, it was something else entirely. This was the straw-lined root cellar, and before 1940, it sat behind nearly every farmhouse in America. Colonial families called it the winter pantry, and it did what no icebox could. It kept apples firm, sweet, and alive for 8 months without a single watt of electricity. But sometime after World War II, we paved over the pits and bought refrigerators, and we lost the one storage method that might save your food when the power goes out for good. So, how do you build one? I asked that exact question to a man named Silas on a 20-acre homestead deep in the Appalachian foothills where the power lines stop and the dirt roads turn to gravel. He didn't say a word. He walked me behind his smokehouse, kicked aside a rotting pallet, and pointed to a mound of earth covered in dead grass. It looked like an old grave. "Go on," he said. "Open it." I pulled back a wooden hatch layered with straw, and a rush of cool, damp air hit my face. It was August, 92 degrees outside. Inside that pit, it was 33 degrees, and stacked in wooden crates, wrapped in rye-straw, were apples, hundreds of them, firm, unblemished, not a single shriveled skin. He told me those apples had been sitting there since last October, 10 months in the ground, and they tasted like the day they were picked. But before I show you how he built it, you need to understand the science that makes this pit work when every refrigerator fails after a month. It was never just about temperature. It was about a precise balance of cold, moisture, and gas control that modern technology forgot. Silas learned this from his grandfather, who learned it from his, going back to the 1700s, when every colonial farm had a straw-lined root cellar. They grew specific apples, bred for keeping: Newton Pippins, Stayman Winesaps, and black twigs. These were not supermarket apples. Their skins were thicker, their flesh denser, and they actually improved in flavor after months in cold storage. The ideal temperature is 32 degrees with 85 to 95% humidity. The ground 5 feet down holds that temperature year-round, even when the surface freezes solid. The straw does something a refrigerator cannot. It breathes. It absorbs excess moisture that would cause rot while releasing just enough to keep the apple skins from shriveling. And it traps the ethylene gas that apples naturally release, slowing their ripening instead of accelerating it. That is why one rotten apple really can spoil the whole barrel. If you don't separate your varieties and manage the air precisely, the ethylene turns your entire harvest into compost in a matter of weeks. Silas knew this. He sorted his apples by variety, placed them stem down so they wouldn't bruise each other, and never stored them near potatoes or onions, because apples and pears release a gas that makes potatoes sprout, and turnips and cabbage give off odors that the fruit absorbs. This was not folklore. It was a technology perfected by generations of farmers who relied on this one pit to feed their families from November clear through July. But what Silas told me next changed everything I know about why you have never heard of this. He reached into the pit and pulled out a jar of what looked like sand. "This," he said, "is the real secret." And when I saw what was inside that jar, I understood why the refrigeration industry spent millions of dollars in the 1950s making sure every family in America forgot how to dig a hole, because they didn't kill the root-cellar with convenience. They killed it with fear. Silas poured a small mound of that sand into his palm. It was not sand. It was a gray powder, fine as flour, cool to the touch. Diatomaceous earth, fossilized remains of tiny aquatic organisms, mined from ancient lake beds. His grandfather called it cellar dust, and every apple got a light coating before it went into the pit. The microscopic edges sliced the waxy bodies of mold spores on contact. It absorbed ethylene gas faster than any modern filter, and it held 30% of its own weight in moisture without ever feeling wet. It did what a refrigerator cannot. It created a sterile, self-regulating microclimate that required no electricity, no compressor, no moving parts, nothing to break, nothing to replace. But here is the part that made refrigerant executives nervous. This powder cost nearly nothing. Silas bought it by the 50-pound bag at a feed store for $14, enough to preserve the entire harvest of a half-acre orchard for a full year. No Freon, no copper coils, no monthly electric bill pushing the temperature down to 32 degrees with 85% humidity. The earth did all of that for free, at 6 feet deep, and it never failed. Not in the Great Depression, not in the Dust Bowl, not when the grid went down. So, what happened? Why did every farm in America abandon a technology that required dirt and straw and a $14 bag of powder? The answer is not convenience. The answer is a marketing campaign called Clean Cold that ran from 1946 to 1952, paid for by a coalition of electric utilities, appliance manufacturers, and the newly formed American Refrigeration Institute. They did not sell you a refrigerator. They sold you fear of the ground. In 1947, the Saturday Evening Post ran a full-page illustration that terrified housewives across the country. A root-cellar door half open, and crawling out of it were rats, cockroaches, and a thick black mold labeled botulism. The headline read, "Is your family eating from the grave?" Below it, a photograph of a gleaming white General Electric refrigerator with a mother smiling as she handed her child an apple. The caption promised hospital clean cold and the safety your family deserves. That single advertisement did more damage to food sovereignty than any law ever passed. County health departments began classifying root cellars as unsanitary food storage. Building codes in 38 states quietly removed root cellar specifications from new home construction manuals by 1955. The USDA stopped publishing bulletins on straw storage and apple pit construction. And within a decade, the knowledge of diatomaceous earth, straw wrapping, and gas management had vanished from public memory. The apple pit became a grave in the backyard, not a pantry. But Silas's family never stopped reading those old bulletins. They kept the 1917 USDA Farmers Bulletin, number 974, titled Home Storage of Fruits and Vegetables in Cellars, wrapped in oilcloth, and passed it down like scripture, while the rest of the country paid a monthly refrigeration tax. They simply opened a hatch, and that hatch reveals something about the limits of industrial science that will make you question every appliance in your kitchen. Because when I asked Silas how long his apples actually lasted beyond those 10 months, he laughed and pointed to a crate I had not noticed. It was hidden in the darkest corner of the pit, and the apples inside it were not from last October. They were from the year before. 19 months in the ground, still firm, still sweet, and that is when he handed me a photograph that explained everything. He held it up to the lantern light. It was not a family snapshot. It was a yellowed photograph of a page from a government bulletin, dated 1918. The page showed a cross-section of a root-cellar, every dimension labeled by hand: the 6-foot depth, the straw lining, the ventilation pipe, the drainage gravel, and a note in the margin that read, "Dust each apple with diatomaceous silt before laying." It was from USDA Farmers Bulletin, number 1123, titled "Storing Apples Without Ice." Silas's grandfather had photographed the page at the county extension office in 1934, afraid the information would disappear. He was right. By 1948, that bulletin was listed as out of print. By 1952, all reference to straw-lined apple pits had been removed from USDA publications. The Clean Cold campaign did more than run ads. Its sponsors lobbied state legislatures to classify earthen food storage as a public health risk. They funded studies at 4 land-grant universities claiming root cellars bred listeria and botulism, studies that were later quietly retracted for lack of evidence, but only after the damage was irreversible. Home insurance policies across the Midwest were rewritten to exclude coverage for losses in root cellars. Banks refused to appraise them as property improvements. Within a decade, the most reliable food storage system in human history had been legally defined as a hazard. And here is the piece nobody talks about. This did not just kill a building method. It killed apple biodiversity. The varieties that stored naturally for 9 months, the Newton Pippin, the black twig, the Arkansas black, the northern spy, were thick-skinned, dense-fleshed, and high in tannins. They actually improved in flavor after months in the dark, but they didn't look like the crimson, waxed fruit preferred by the new supermarket chains. So the nursery catalogs stopped selling them. Orchards were bulldozed and replanted with Red Delicious and Golden Delicious. Apples bred for appearance, not longevity. Without cold storage, those apples turn mealy in 2 weeks. The industry didn't just sell you a refrigerator. It sold you a dependence on the refrigerator, and it buried the trees that made the refrigerator unnecessary. Silas still grows those trees. He grafted every one from scion wood taken off the 100-year-old trees his great-grandfather planted. He handed me a black twig apple that had spent 19 months in his pit, and a store-bought Red Delicious that was 4 weeks from the grocery shelf. The black twig snapped when I bit it. The juice ran down my chin. The Red Delicious caved in like foam and tasted like sweetened cardboard. The difference was not the soil or the growing method. It was the genetics of survival. One was bred to outlast winter in a dirt hole. The other was bred to survive a refrigerated truck. But wait, it gets worse. Modern apple storage is not just cold. The commercial apple you buy in June was picked the previous September. It has been sitting in a controlled atmosphere warehouse where oxygen is reduced to 1.5%. Carbon dioxide is elevated, and the gas 1-MCP, sold under the brand name Smart Fresh, is pumped in to block ethylene and halt ripening completely. The apple is not alive. It is suspended in an odorless, colorless coma. When you bring it home, it does not rot. It slowly decays from the inside out, losing flavor and texture in ways most people cannot detect, because they have never tasted an apple that woke up from a straw bed at 33 degrees. And if the power grid fails that warehouse for more than 48 hours, every apple in that room rots simultaneously. A manual from 1917 warned against this exact fragility. It said, "The earth never fails. Machinery always will." They were right. Now, I know what you are thinking. This sounds like something that only works on a homestead with 6 acres and a tractor. But Silas shook his head when I told him that. He walked me to the back of his barn, pointed to a section of bare ground, maybe 4 feet square, and said, "You could build one right here." Then he handed me a shovel. What he taught me in the next 3 hours requires no permit, no concrete, no electricity, and it will cost you less than a dinner for two. And when I show you the exact steps, you will never look at your backyard the same way again. So I dug. Silas marked a 4-foot square in the soil behind his barn and handed me a shovel that felt older than my grandfather. He said 4 words, 6 feet, no less. The first 2 feet were easy, by foot 3. I hit clay, dense and cool. By foot 5, the air temperature dropped 20 degrees from where I stood above. At exactly 6 feet, I stood in a hole that felt like October, even though August heat shimmered across the grass above my head. He told me to line the bottom with 4 inches of pea gravel. No permit, no concrete, no drainage pipe. Water follows gravity through stone, and the surrounding earth wicks the moisture away naturally. Then the walls, a double layer of rye-straw, packed tight and held in place with rough-cut cedar planks he scavenged from an old fence, a single 2-inch PVC ventilation pipe, covered with a screen to keep mice out, ran from the floor of the pit through the ceiling hatch. That was it. Total cost, $14 for the diatomaceous earth, $8 for the gravel, and the straw came from his own field. He watched me wrap every apple in a thin cradle of dry straw and nestle it stem down into a wooden crate. He dusted each layer with cellar dust and said nothing. The only sounds were the crunch of straw and the distant hum of bees. When the last crate slid into the darkness, he lowered the hatch and spread a foot of loose hay over the top. That was October 22nd. I came back on a blistering afternoon in late July, 94 degrees in the sun. I opened the hatch, climbed down into a pocket of 34-degree air, and pulled a Newton Pippin from the crate. Its skin was taut, its weight perfect. I bit into it, and juice ran cold down my wrist. It tasted sharper, sweeter, more alive than any apple I had ever bought from a store. And that apple was 9 months old. But the moment that made me stop breathing came 15 minutes later. Silas led me out past the old orchard, past the black twigs and the northern spies, to a single tree at the edge of the woods. Its bark was gnarled, its limbs propped with forked sticks to keep them from cracking under their own weight. He said, "This one is called the Taliaferro. Thomas Jefferson grew it at Monticello. The agronomists declared it extinct in 1904. He paused. Except it isn't. It's been right here since 1816, because my family kept the scions alive in the same pit where we kept the apples. The lost varieties were never really lost. They were hiding in holes in the ground, wrapped in straw and dust, tended by families who never trusted the world to remember what it had. The same pit that feeds you through the winter also preserves the genetic memory of an entire agricultural civilization. You cannot say that about a refrigerator. Now, I know you are sitting there wondering if this can actually work on your property, with your schedule, with zero experience. The answer is yes, and I put every step, every measurement, and a list of the heritage tree nurseries that still sell these forgotten varieties in one place so you can build your own apple pit this fall and taste what we almost lost. That link is below, but stay here, because there is one more thing you need to hear before you go. It is not about apples. It is about what happens when a society forgets that the earth can feed and preserve and protect without a monthly bill, without a supply chain, without permission. Silas did not invent anything new. He simply refused to forget what everyone else was told to abandon. And that refusal turned a 6-foot hole in the ground into a seed bank, a pantry, and a quiet act of defiance that costs nothing but a shovel and a Saturday. The question now is not whether this works. The question is, what else did we bury that deserves to be dug back up? If this got you thinking, hit subscribe. Not for me, for what comes next. Because in the next video, I am showing you how the old-timers kept meat cold, without ice, in a box that fits on a porch and ran for $0 a year. And the Department of Agriculture once recommended it to every farm in America. Drop a comment and tell me what you would store first in your own apple pit. I read every single one, and if this content makes sense to you, there is a special offer waiting for you through the link in the first pinned comment. Go take a look. I will see you in the next one.